Police are out in force in LA as protests against Donald Trump's immigration policies threaten to flare up again. For more, Bobby Chacon, former FBI special agent, joins us live. Tell us, is this level of response necessary, do you think, from the White House?
Well, I think it is. I think we've had, in the last few years, we've had protests that have erupted into violence very quickly, and the law enforcement can't afford to kind of be catching up and play catch up with these kind of things, or else cities will burn and people will die. And that's what happened in the summer of 2020 when the protests turned into riots. They got out of hand, billions of dollars worth of damage to our cities. Dozens of deaths. And so I think you have to get out ahead of it. So it may look like heavy-handedness, but it's really just trying to get out ahead of the violence before it gets out of control.
Because you've got the California governor saying these are the acts of a dictator, not a president. That's pretty harsh criticism from California into the White House, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it is in some respects, but I mean, the criticism is this political criticism of the White House is not new, and it's certainly not more than I've seen in the past. The governor, the one thing he hasn't alleged is anything been done improper. The president has the right to come in, take over a state's National Guard and deploy them in exceptional circumstances. And the White House clearly feels this is an exceptional circumstance.
OK, let's talk about the other possible exceptional circumstance, because there is talk that President Trump will use a special act, I understand he has the capability to use, and call in the Marines. How unusual would that be? That's
very, very unusual. That's even more exceptional than a National Guard unit being deployed. This is something I can't remember in my memory. And it's because it needs a special act because we have a legal theory here called posse comitatus, which prevents the U.S. military from ever engaging in law enforcement activity. It's really to prevent a military coup, because that's how that starts. And so our military is not allowed to engage in domestic U.S. law enforcement activities. So they can't arrest people. They can't do things that law enforcement is charged with doing. And so to deploy U.S. Marines in this context is, very unusual. I can't remember it happening. And if they are deployed, they have to act in a very narrow scope of engagements. In other words, they can't be arresting people. They have to act as backup, crowd control, things like that. It's going to be very interesting to watch, but they can't really engage, or they shouldn't be engaging in law enforcement activity. Yeah,
that would be a major escalation. In my understanding, that has only happened 6 times in US history. The last time was in 1992, of course, during the Rodney King riots. What do you think that would do if President Trump calls in the US Marines?
Well, I mean, it depends on what the protesters do. It will, if it incites them and more people show up, and it can escalate. Or if the Marines come in force and help and back up the local law enforcement, and they do their job and they do the crowd control role, and things settle down, then it could be a good thing. It could go either way depending on how emotions ride. I think that it's a lot's going to depend on the governor and the mayor and the emotional climate that they kind of put out there. If they can tamp down people's emotions, but if they rile people up and say it's us against them, it's the state against the White House, then things could flare up again.
Yeah, and also how the rest of America feels about that being used. Thank you very much for your insight this morning.
Sure.
Here's Shervo.